Thank you to BTC Prague for organizing and having us. Look, this is the new hot thing, right? The whole Bitcoin treasury companies, leverage Bitcoin equities, whatever we're calling it. But Eric, it would be great to start with a bit about your own Bitcoin journey, a little bit on how you first sort of understood Bitcoin and how did you build some of your own conviction in Bitcoin?
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to bring Semler Scientific to Europe and meet a lot of the European investors. Bitcoin came to me because I'm just naturally, I've been an investor most of my career. I ran a hedge fund called TCS Capital for many years. We invested in technology and media. We're about $4 billion under management. And it was always just my MO was to look at things that other people weren't that interested in or were controversial, and Bitcoin kind of emerged as this early mega trend that was controversial and also not really, people weren't really investing in it, so I was naturally interested in it. The idea of a Bitcoin treasury company made a lot of sense to me based on following Michael Saylor and also following the stock markets in the US particularly. There's a lot of these zombie companies that he talks about. I've been following them as an investor. I know of so many of these companies because I meet them all the time. They're called like SMID caps, small, mid-sized market cap companies. And they were just falling out of favor in the US stock markets. Even though they had attractive balance sheets, some of them had decent businesses with good free cash flow. No one was giving them any credit for the value of their balance sheet and the kind of the pristine nature or the overcapitalization. And no one really cared too much about their stocks, their stories, because in general, they were thinly traded stocks, or they're just, why waste your time on a smaller, more difficult name to figure out than just buy one of the Mag 7. So there became this kind of wasteland of zombie companies that Michael talks about. I call them SMID caps. And so to me, it made so much sense in some ways to kind of do something about it. I've spent a lot of time in my career as an activist, kind of pushing companies for change, going on boards. And so this made a lot of sense to me to go after these SMID caps, but then listening to Michael and his idea of putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet really appealed to me. And I thought, when I listened to those podcasts of his about zombie companies, I knew that I was chairman of one. I had recently become chairman of Semler Scientific through an activist role, changed the board around. And when he was talking about his company in August of 2020, when it was, kind of a zombie itself, that was who we were. And so it resonated. And I went to, I reached out to him, and he couldn't have been more welcoming, rolled out the red carpet, thrilled that we were pursuing this, and I'm shocked that we were actually the first US public company to do it after him. It's just amazing to think, with all the success that he had, that no one had tried to do this, no one had followed in his footsteps until we did.
Yeah, and I think while we're here, I think maybe it would be good to address this common line of thinking that, oh, it's too late, and similarly, people have this idea with Bitcoin. They think, oh, I missed the ground floor on Bitcoin, and now I need to look at something else because it's now too late. Do you think that was what people were thinking? And was that why people didn't follow Michael Saylor's footsteps?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that was the issue. I think that he was still considered an outlier for some reason, even though he created so much value. I think people thought that that was an exception to some kind of rule, and that it's,
Right, he got lucky or
exactly.
something, yeah.
Yeah, and he became a cult figure, which he still is, and that was unique to him. I think that a lot of people didn't understand the financial engineering he was doing. I honestly didn't understand it as well as I should have when I first decided to pursue this. I was just excited to put Bitcoin on our balance sheet. I didn't know that there was also a whole playbook that he employed and that he taught me, and educated me on. So I think a lot of it was misunderstood, and I just think too, up until then, Bitcoin wasn't really institutionalized. You had an adverse SEC. That's a big issue. That's why we're seeing so many now. When we started out, the SEC was very difficult to deal with and made it very difficult for us to get an ATM in place. And that's completely changed. So that's opened the floodgates. Sure. So I would say that was the reason.
Now, let's walk through some of the timeline. So in terms of when you personally got interested in Bitcoin, and then when you did it as a company, and then when you started purchasing as a company, and then when did you actually, well, if you could just walk us through the timeline there, and we could, yeah.
My first exposure to Bitcoin was actually walking into the office of Wences Casares when he was running, I think, Ribbit or Capital or Lime Capital, Lemon, and I went to his office and was really impressed by his presentation and his energy and enthusiasm. It didn't get me to act on Bitcoin. I wish I had that early, 2012. But as time passed, I just got more and more interested in it. I had some good friends who were very successful in it early, and I started to really pay a lot more attention given their success. The big moment for me, really, I think if there were a few, obviously, the ETF and Larry Fink's orange pilling was a huge factor for me. I'm very much focused on the institutional side, more the individual side of Bitcoin, and as an institutional investor, and just seeing changes like that, obviously it's accelerated so much with the Trump administration. But it's been an evolving process for me, but I am overwhelmed by the institutionalization, and I think that'll just continue to gain more steam. I think the stablecoin progress we're seeing also helps. I think that there's still a lot of resistance to Bitcoin treasury companies among traditional investors in the market. I think they think the idea of a premium to MNAV is a joke. I don't think that that's kind of something that people are buying into, even though some are benefiting from that.
Gotcha. And so let's talk a little bit about that, because there's a difference between just merely buying and holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet, which also is considered a Bitcoin treasury company, and let's say using debt and equity to accumulate more Bitcoin. So can you just talk through the difference of those? How do you see that? Which companies should just buy and hold Bitcoin, and which companies should take an active financial engineering strategy?
To each his own. It's your level of risk tolerance as a board and how much upside you see in owning Bitcoin, right? If you really believe that there's this massive upside and you think that you can capture it through this engineering of your balance sheet through debt and equity, which we have done, then you should be, pursuing that. I think it's fine if there are companies, that just want to have Bitcoin on their balance sheet because they're worried about fiat money and all the issues that are out there in the world with debt and fiscal issues. So I think it's going to be in all different brands. I don't think everyone has to go hog wild, be a Bitcoin treasury company. I don't have any bias against them if they decide to do the mild version. We're not really interested in that. We're more interested in the aggressive version, the ambitious version, and we really believe that the more Bitcoin we own, the more digital real estate we own. You've heard Michael Saylor talk about that.
It's like a gold rush, kind of a Bitcoin rush.
Yeah, I think there's a massive amount of optionality in owning Bitcoin, and having a scaled, being a scaled player in Bitcoin is a huge, mandate for us. One of the things that really is important to me as a public market investor is that there are more public market equities with exposure to Bitcoin. As most institutional fund managers can't own Bitcoin outright, they can't own the ETFs, there's very few stocks they can own. I mean, MicroStrategy is really it. You can't make, if you're running a large mutual fund, you can't make MicroStrategy, more than 5 or 10% of your fund. That would be out, kind of unusual. And so you need more public equities to be in the $5 to $10 billion and higher market caps. And that in itself may justify why you should trade at a premium to your Bitcoin holdings. There's just a scarcity of public equities. And you can look at all of the companies now that are forming Bitcoin treasury strategies. Very few of them have that kind of scale. They don't have the market cap size. They don't have that scale. There will be some. But we feel like we're a great candidate in that area. And we also are kind of pursuing this a little differently from other folks because we came into this with a very strong healthcare cash flowing business, and that has faced some headwinds over the last year. But we believe that we have a fantastic product waiting for approval in the FDA, and that can kind of return us to our glory in healthcare, and that may coincide with, who knows, it doesn't feel like it, but there could be another bear market in Bitcoin. We're well protected with having that, potentially high cash flowing business.
Interesting. And so just to contextualize and understand the size, now just from my reading online, you correct me if I've got the numbers wrong, but as I understand, Semler Scientific currently holds around 4,400 coins, something in that.
4,449.
Right, and on the, let's say, the league table globally, I think you are 14th when I checked.
Yeah,
So,
I look at it like among the U.S. It's changing, but we were the fourth largest U.S. Bitcoin treasury company.
gotcha. So you got like MSTR, Tesla, maybe Mara.
I don't count Tesla because they're not
Okay.
a Bitcoin treasury.
I see.
Yeah,
Gotcha. So then you got Mara,
corporate holders.
Riot,
I
yeah.
think you're probably right. We're somewhere in that 12
Gotcha.
to 14 range. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so then, essentially, your point here is that once you get above a certain size, you hit a certain kind of economies of scale, let's say, and there's a kind of access. And so let's dive into this, because I think this is one of the biggest, strongest questions that people will have around MNAV greater than 1. Of course, now, personally, I'm bullish on this category, but for the sake of argument and understanding, why should we assess treasury companies with an MNAV greater than 1? What are the main reasons that such an MNAV greater than 1 is sustainable?
Good question, and it's a hot topic for sure. I think it's different for every company. I think why we should trade at a premium is because that what I mentioned is just that we got a big lead out of the gate, and we're hoping to be one of those scarce public equities that fund managers can own, and that is a scarce commodity. I'd say the other fact is I think we're the most levered of the Bitcoin treasury companies. So if Bitcoin rises, which we think it will, we should go up more than Bitcoin and the others. And so that might be accompanied by an increase in our MNAV. And I think also just there's the intangible. I think there's this really important factor that's not quantifiable, which is really trying to connect with the Bitcoin community. And developing a strong brand within that community. I think MicroStrategy and Metaplan have done a phenomenal job of that, and I think we could do a better job. So we're making some moves that we're really excited about. Can't talk about all of them today, but we did bring Natalie Brunel
as a board member.
Yeah, as a board member. She's been a great bridge to the community for us. She's been a huge asset, huge contributor so far as a board member, and super excited to have her involved. We hope to make other announcements like that and strengthen that bond with the Bitcoin community. I think there is real value in that.
Gotcha. And so let's talk a little bit about this MNAV premium. As you said, there's maybe a legal, regulatory advantage, sort of an arbitrage here, that maybe there are people who cannot otherwise buy Bitcoin directly and put it in their cold card or whatever, and for that reason, they're buying stocks, and obviously Bitcoin treasury companies like yourself are one of the ways they can do that. And because we're so early, you can justify an MNAV greater than 1. So then the other question is, how long do you think this window is? Is it from here until hyper-Bitcoinization? Is that like 20 years away? Or do you think the window closes then? Or where are you at there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it actually will increase for us. I view that because I think what's going to happen is there is just going to be this kind of rarefied group of companies that are going to have the scale and the assets in digital real estate. And I also think our volatility has increased, and that's been a key unlock for us, is having that's really important, which I think may be a tough barrier for a lot of these new companies, is to create kind of liquidity and volatility in your stock that you can monetize. Right, and that's
where the options.
That's something I didn't mention as part of the MNAV, but our volatility has skyrocketed, and that's over the long run going to help us a lot in terms of accessing capital markets, and so that's really important. But I think over time, actually, maybe in general it does narrow because there's just so many of them, and some of them are not going to succeed. But I think that there will be consolidation. Meaning there'll be mergers and acquisitions. And when you're in an environment where things are merging and there's lots of deals, multiples tend to be higher. So if you're trading at a high MNAV, and you can buy something for a much lower MNAV, that's very accretive too. There's M&A kind of comes into the equation as two things happen. One, as an alternative to doing what you're doing. It's just another way to add Bitcoin to your balance sheet. And then also just there's this possibility that you might need a second source of cash flow. The best way to buy Bitcoin is with your own cash flow. That's how we started. Our first buy was $60 million off our balance sheet from the cash flow that our healthcare company generated. So that yield, that very high yielding purchase, could become even more valuable as things narrow. You need that operating cash flow.
I see. And I think, at least the way I'm understanding it, I'm curious to hear how you see it, there's definitely an argument there that different jurisdictions may need their own local, quote-unquote, hometown hero, Bitcoin treasury company, because, in different countries, there may be different tax treatment, different regulatory treatment, and it'll just be easier for, for example, in the Metaplanet case, Japanese investors to buy something that's on their local market. So do you see it like there'll be sort of a market for let's say, the top few in each jurisdiction, and over time, there will be M&A activity? Is that sort of your broad view of this?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that you're going to see, I'm not sure if exactly what you're getting to, but there's going to be more geographical distribution in terms of the actual company. So I would expect some of the big leaders to get into other markets, not just be in the US. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of, cross-jurisdiction things. I think that's going to become really valuable. Why wouldn't you try to access a market that has this huge tax advantage, if you're a Bitcoin treasury company? I think you're going to see much more of that too.
So another obvious question from a Bitcoiner's perspective, they may say, well, Eric, why should I buy equity in your company when I can just buy Bitcoin myself, right? Obvious question, but just for the sake of answering, how would you?
Yeah, I hate to sound repetitive, but I'd say because one, if you can't do that, you're an institutional fund in the U.S., then that would be one reason. I think another is just for our healthcare business. I think that it can be and has been a very accretive contributor to our Bitcoin holdings. And I think also just our leverage. Our leverage is
it's like
you could lever and buy Bitcoin yourself personally, or you could buy our stock and get that leverage too. Yeah. So, and you can also, there's also optionality in that we will be working really hard to creatively buy Bitcoin in the future and become one of those scaled players.
Absolutely. And so I think the other way I'm thinking about it is everyday individuals, maybe they can't access such cheap levels of capital that these large public companies can, especially once they've hit a certain level of scale and size. And so maybe it's more like they're trying to access that. But of course, there's always this kind of strong ethos, and I support that, this kind of not your keys, not your coins ethos. So I guess everyone has to do their own kind of assessment on how many coins I'm going to keep in my, in my multi-sig or in my cold storage versus what am I willing to, play around with Bitcoin treasury companies.
Yeah, and I think MicroStrategy has done a great job of kind of giving investors all these different flavors, right? Like you can own Bitcoin, you can own, all their different securities that have a different risk kind of level to them. And I think, ultimately that's what we'd all like to be able to offer investors, just a diversification within Bitcoin.
I see, yeah. And so it seems like natural that the larger you get, once you hit a certain scale, then it's natural that you'll start doing the same things that Michael is doing with offering Stride, and Strike. Yeah. It's hard to keep track of all these different things, and I think that's also why it's like another whole world here. Now, let's talk a little bit on the risk side. I think people will be naturally thinking, oh, this is kind of crazy. Like, look how much the returns are on this thing. Maybe it will make them feel like, is this like a new kind of shitcoin or a new kind of BlockFi FTX kind of thing? What do you see as the risks in this strategy? Is it when the bear market comes, or where do you see the risks in this kind of financial engineering approach?
Yeah, I think that obviously you have to be careful about how much debt you put on the company, especially if there's a bear market, and you want to have that firepower to buy Bitcoin when it's down. And you don't want to tap out before that happens. And I think that could be a risk, for sure. And so we're very conscious of that. We're optimistic that our healthcare business is going to be a huge buffer if that happens, because the timing of its recovery and getting an, approval from the FDA for our heart disease product kind of coincides with a good kind of run in 26, 27 for us in the healthcare. So I like kind of the timing of that. But in general, you do have to be wary of companies that are doing it just to do it, not really know what they're doing. And you know, it's a good headline, but let's see the follow through. It's not so easy. There are a lot of potholes, and you've got to be ready for that. I mean, so many things change, right? I'm doing this right now. I never expected to do that, right? I never expected all the social media and all the constant communication with investors and the complete turnover in your shareholder base. You know, there's a lot of things that you kind of have to adjust to. I also think it's really important to have a deep team, a really deep team. That's something that I really noticed at Strategy. Like when we first started this and we got to know the treasurer and the CFO and the president and on down, I mean, it is deep and strong and well, you know, a well-oiled machine. I haven't really seen that elsewhere. That shows me that we need to do that too. Like it's not something one or two people can do themselves. You need depth, and I don't think everybody can afford that depth or find that depth. It's not that easy to find the talent that you need to execute this strategy. It's not like this is an industry that's been around forever. It's a new industry, and there's people that need to be super sharp about understanding all the different financing issues and capabilities that you have. And you can't just rely on Michael Saylor for his next big speech or security to kind of lead you. You have to kind of figure this out on your own a lot. You have to be innovative, and you can't just be a follower.
I see. And so, as you said, I think it's a new industry and it requires expertise across different areas. Obviously, there's the Bitcoin component of it, maybe investor relations, capital markets, equity and debt. And of course, there'll be different flavors and things in each jurisdiction, right? Totally. Something that works in Japan is different to something that works in the United States, to the UK, and so on. So there'll be, I guess, so where would you see the real scarcity in talent?
I think that's a great question. I think there's probably a scarcity of two things. One is that director of Bitcoin strategy, the Dylan LeClaire. You know, to me, there's no one who compares to him. He is just in a league of his own. He's done such a phenomenal job with Metaplanet, and it's hard to replicate a Dylan LeClaire. So like that, the person who is just coming up with really innovative ways to create value out of nothing, basically, is what they did, obviously, when they had no assets, essentially, and we're a tiny little company, and we're able to turn that into something very meaningful. So that area. I also think, I'm no social media expert, and I don't have a long history in social media, but it seems to me that that's really important. And
the attention economy, right?
Yeah, the attention economy. It's so hard to quantify, but like just watching Natalie Brunell and the work she does every day, and it just blows me away. And realize how valuable someone like her is to our strategy. And I don't think there's a lot of people that can replicate what she does either. And I think that we need to find those people and bring them into our organization and build an all-star team.
Gotcha. And so that's. Yeah, because it's interesting to see the way some of this started. Obviously, Michael and Strategy, and it seems that UTXO Management and David Bailey and the guys have sort of gone to sort of seed companies around the world, and then not just capital, but they put Dylan into Metaplanet, and they're placing people. So I think that's kind of speaking to what you're saying, that you need this, let's say, this bench, this roster of talent across various areas, like you said, the director of Bitcoin strategy, the kind of attention. Maybe it's a bit of a silly analogy, but it's almost like having the front man of the band. You know, like you got to have a good, strong front man of the band who can get out there and talk on TV about Bitcoin and why it's the future of money and all of these things, isn't it?
But also those incredible charts that Michael takes us through, every quarter.
Right.
And, I mean, he has a great bench to help him with that, and he obviously tells the story beautifully, understands it better than anyone, but there's some serious intellectual firepower behind that. It's really valuable too, so.
Yeah, so all of those things. So coming to sort of the question of the bear market, there's, I guess, one area that is kind of on my mind. Are there areas where, okay, let me put it this way. One thing is this concept of, hey, never sell your Bitcoin.
Right.
But on the other hand, second concept is increase Bitcoin per share. Can these two concepts be in a conflict in a bear market? If MNAV goes below 1, companies will have an incentive. Now, they may operate in different ways, but some of them have an incentive to sell some Bitcoin, buy some shares, drive up BPS. So how are you seeing that? Is that a contradiction, or is it just sort of the way companies will operate differently on that?
Yeah, and I think for us, we're not selling our Bitcoin. We really believe strongly that it's digital real estate and something we want to own long term. I happen to be just a very long-term oriented investor, so I have a very, very strong conviction in the long-term value of Bitcoin. I'd never want to sell it. But I could see this happening with other companies because they've talked about it, like David has. But I think it's gonna be an inevitable issue for so many of the companies that like you said, may trade below MNAV, and they have to decide what to do there. Obviously, there's multiple things you can do, right? You can buy
different
back.
levers you can pull, right?
Yeah. So for us, I don't, I'd never sell our Bitcoin. It just doesn't make sense to me. I'd rather, figure out a way to buy back stock than do that, without selling Bitcoin. So it doesn't enter my realm of thinking. But it is interesting how many voices there are in the Bitcoin community on all these different issues like yield maximization and taking your Bitcoin and trying to earn a yield on it. That's a controversial topic. There's a lot of things where I think companies will need to take a stand, Bitcoin and say this is what we're going to do. Make it clear to the market, and not everybody's going to love it, but it's what you believe in. You got to have the conviction that you think it's the right thing to do.
For sure. All right. So we've only got a couple minutes left. So if you have any thoughts, let's say advice for other people in terms of whether they are looking at starting a treasury company, maybe in another jurisdiction, or if they are thinking as an investor, should I invest in these Bitcoin treasury companies? Do you have a closing thought for people?
Yeah, I think probably it's very obvious, but you need to be differentiated. You need to have a differentiated strategy. It can't be copy Michael at this point. I think it needs to be a little more inventive and innovative, and I think it helps a lot to have a two-pronged narrative where you own an asset that generates cash flow that helps you buy Bitcoin accretively. I think that's really important. So before you start out, and when you get that big pop out of the box, with the announcement, you've got to think much longer term and kind of get a 3-year roadmap for where you want to be in 3 years, how much Bitcoin you want to own, what's your financial profile, how much debt do you want to take on. Know that it's not going to always be open, right? We did a convertible in February. I think we're the only other Bitcoin treasury company that's done a convertible offering in the kind of traditional way. We did one with Cantor Fitzgerald since MicroStrategy. And that market's probably not as open as it was, right? So you got to figure out other alternatives. You got to be really clever about how you're going to, differentiate yourself. And I have to say, Natalie, myself, Renee, our CFO, we spend like every day talking about how we're going to differentiate ourselves. And we're working really hard to do that. It's one of the reasons I'm here in Prague. I think it's really important to be here, to meet new investors, to tell our story abroad, and to just constantly get the story out, because we really believe in it. I just think we're at a great spot right now. If I'm an investor out there in the public markets and I see a company like ours that's trading at a low MNAV, has $500 million of Bitcoin, and a product in the FDA that has a lot of potential, I spend a lot of time digging into it.
Yeah, and as you said, there'll be there'll be many different types, and there'll be some who are maybe more like a pure play style, and others who are more like yourself with an operating business. And the pitch may be, look, we will be more sustainable in the bear markets because we can keep stacking. Yeah. So I think we're going to see all these different approaches, but that's sadly all we have time for. So everyone, please put your hands together for Eric Semler of Semler Scientific.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Secure your BTC Prague 2026 ticket at the lowest possible price now.